He locked us in during a gas leak. Then we found her desk. I was half asleep in Miss Wellington's biology class when the intercom jolted the whole room awake. Gas line rupture. Carbon monoxide. Building C lethal concentrations. All students and staff evacuate immediately. We'd never run a drill like this before. Instinct kicked in. Everyone stood up, ready to move. Miss Wellington got to the door first and physically blocked it, wearing the expression she only wore when she felt her authority was being questioned. Nobody leaves. We're in the middle of a project. I tried to speak up. She cut me off. This is a pathetic excuse to skip my class. Sit down or you're all getting 0 on the midterm. That's worth 80% of your grade. We sat back down. This was the thing about Miss Wellington, a drill sergeant about the smallest things, completely unprepared for the actual lessons she was supposed to teach. She'd mark you wrong even when you were right if you hadn't solved it her exact way. Once, our whole class quietly agreed to forget what page we were on, just to see if she'd notice. We spent the entire period pretending to search for a chapter she never once questioned. The PA crackled again, sharper this time. This is not a drill. Carbon monoxide levels critical. Explosion risk. Evacuate now. Miss Wellington actually smiled. They're overselling it. Carbon monoxide doesn't explode. Basic chemistry. When a classmate tried to explain the actual danger, she cut her off too. Anyone who walks out that door fails this semester. Your parents will love explaining that to colleges. She planted herself at the door like a bouncer. Besides, if there really was carbon monoxide, we'd already be unconscious. You all look fine to me. Everyone sat back down again. Nobody wanted to risk their GPA. That's when Rick's nose started bleeding. Mackenzie put her head down, groaning about a headache. My own skull was starting to pound, that heavy pressure behind the eyes. I looked out the window. The entire school was already assembled on the football field. Every other building was dark. We were the only lit classroom left standing. The principal was outside, on the phone, pointing directly at our windows, clearly panicking. Fire trucks were pulling into the lot. Miss Wellington shut the blinds, pulled a stack of papers from her desk drawer. A pop quiz, punishment for the disruption. Jenny threw up on hers the second it hit her desk. My friend Mike slumped sideways and hit the floor, unconscious. That's when I stood up and tried to walk to the door. She got there first, and this time she didn't just block it. She locked it with a padlock. This coordinated performance is Oscar-worthy, she said, scanning the room. Did you all plan this on TikTok? My phone was going off nonstop. A text from my mom. News says carbon monoxide leak at your school. Are you safe? The sirens outside had changed too. Not the usual fire truck sound, but the specific hazmat horn, the one reserved for something about to go seriously wrong. This is obviously the administration trying to sabotage my tenure review, Miss Wellington announced, like she'd cracked a conspiracy. They know I have the highest fail rate. They want me gone, so they staged this whole hoax. Mackenzie snapped. Are you kidding me? My dad's a firefighter. That's the catastrophic leak siren. We need to leave now. Sit down, Mackenzie. Mackenzie didn't sit down. She grabbed a lab stool and swung it into the window. The glass cracked. Miss Wellington started screaming as the rest of the class joined in, smashing until it finally shattered. Half of us scrambled through the opening. The other half turned back for the unconscious students and started dragging them toward the gap. By the time everyone was out, the building next door was already on fire. 8 kids were down from carbon monoxide poisoning. 3 ended up in the ICU. Firefighters had to physically carry Miss Wellington out while she kept protesting. Everybody lived, but that's not the part nobody talks about. What they found in her desk. Security footage from the night before showed Miss Wellington in the building at 2 a.m. in the basement, near the gas line. When investigators started asking why she'd locked us in, why she'd been so certain the evacuation was fake, the answer was sitting in her own desk drawer the whole time. While she was still outside, screaming about a conspiracy, a firefighter going through her desk pulled out a crumpled letter. He smoothed it flat, and his expression changed completely. Chief, you need to see this. It was her tenure denial, dated 2 days earlier. Not just crumpled, covered in red ink, desperate margin notes about needing the job, about having nothing left after 15 years, about how they couldn't do this to her now. Bills circled and recalculated over and over, numbers that never quite added up no matter how she rearranged. Then Riley Evans, the school's longtime janitor, came forward, visibly sick. Last week she asked me weird questions about the gas lines in Building C, he told the detective. Real specific stuff, where the shut-off valves were, how the ventilation worked. I thought maybe she was planning some kind of demonstration. He trailed off, staring at the classroom where paramedics were still pulling kids through the broken window. The detective pulled up footage from 2 nights before Wellington outside the utility room at 2 a.m., standing motionless in front of the door for 10 straight minutes, walking away, coming back 5 minutes later carrying what looked like a wrench from her car, staring at the door again, leaving. That's not suspicious at all, Mackenzie muttered. When they showed her the footage, Miss Wellington completely unraveled. That's fake. They're editing it. This is a setup. She lunged at the detective, tried to grab his phone. 2 firefighters had to physically restrain her while she screamed the whole way to the patrol car. I was protecting them. I was protecting my students from a from a fake drill. The hospital. I was sitting on the back of an ambulance with an oxygen mask that tasted like plastic when my mom's car screeched into the lot. She didn't even close her door, just ran straight at me, grabbing my face and arms like I might disappear, crying too hard to form real sentences. They loaded Mike onto a stretcher nearby, still unconscious. His mom collapsed the second she saw him, a sound I'd never heard come out of a person before. Mackenzie's dad showed up in full firefighter gear from a station across town. He hadn't even been on duty, just heard it on the radio and drove 90 the whole way. When he saw her, he crushed her into a hug. "You broke the window," his voice cracked. "That's my girl. That's my brave girl." News vans arrived almost immediately. Parents formed a human wall around us. My mom told one reporter to get away from her child, or I'll shove that microphone somewhere real uncomfortable. At the hospital, the waiting room was chaos. Parents shouting at anyone in a suit, demanding to know how a teacher could lock kids in during a gas leak. A doctor eventually came out. Rick, Jenny, and Mike were stable, on hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Jenny had suffered a seizure. Her brain scans looked okay, but should recover fully left her mother visibly unsettled. A detective took my statement at the hospital, every exact word Wellington had used, the midterm threat, the locked door. "She's been acting strange for weeks," I told him. "Strict about nothing, unprepared for everything. Last week she quizzed us on chapters we hadn't even covered, then got mad when we all failed." Mackenzie gave her statement with her father standing beside her. When she repeated Wellington's line about carbon monoxide not exploding, his hands balled into fists so tight his knuckles went white. "Basic chemistry, my ass," he muttered. Arrest and fallout. The next morning, the news showed Miss Wellington getting arrested outside her apartment complex, still in yesterday's clothes, screaming that the school had set her up to force her out. The principal appeared on TV looking a decade older, announcing the school would close for the week for a full safety review. When a reporter asked why he hadn't broken down the door himself, he just walked away. Mike woke up in the ICU confused, in pain, but talking. Jenny woke up the next day with no memory of the incident at all, not the gas leak, not the evacuation, not even coming to school that morning. The seizure had scrambled her short-term memory. Doctors couldn't say if it would return. Rick's nose wouldn't stop bleeding. The carbon monoxide had triggered an underlying blood disorder nobody knew he had, requiring transfusion after transfusion. 3 days later, we were called in for formal statements. Investigators learned Wellington had been living out of her car. An eviction notice dated 3 weeks earlier sat in her desk, the result of losing her tenure, and with it, any summer teaching income. The janitor's photos of the gas valve showed clear tool marks. Someone had tried to force it closed without understanding the mechanism, disabling the automatic safety shutoff in the process. She hadn't just ignored a leak. She'd caused it, trying to fix something that would have resolved itself if she'd left it alone. The district attorney charged her with 8 counts of reckless endangerment and 8 counts of false imprisonment, a combined maximum of 64 years. At her arraignment, appearing via video from jail in an orange jumpsuit that hung off her frame, her lawyer argued a mental health crisis driven by financial desperation. The judge wasn't moved. "Your client locked children in a room filling with carbon monoxide. Mental health crisis or not, she's a danger to the community." Bail denied. The lawsuits and the reckoning. Within a week, Jenny's family filed the first lawsuit, seeking $10 million for her permanent memory damage. 7 more families followed within days. The running total climbed past $47 million, tracked publicly like a scoreboard. At the packed school board meeting, Mackenzie's firefighter father took the mic. "I've been a firefighter for 18 years. I've never heard of a teacher locking students in during an evacuation. The fact that she could do it means your entire system failed." The room erupted in applause. More footage surfaced, Wellington screaming at the janitor over nothing, sitting alone in the teacher's lounge at 11 p.m. staring into space, hurling textbooks against her classroom wall. The principal admitted, voice barely above a whisper, that the district had received 3 formal complaints about her in the 6 weeks before the incident and done nothing beyond internal documentation. The crowd nearly rioted. Security had to escort board members out a back door. Meanwhile, the students who survived kept dealing with the aftermath in very different ways. Rick needed daily $800 injections that insurance kept disputing as experimental. Mike developed severe panic attack, diving under his desk at the sound of a dropped textbook, counting exits in every room, unable to focus on anything else. Jenny would forget conversations mid-sentence, then cry when she realized she couldn't stop it from happening. The school overhauled every safety system. It had new lock that only opened from inside, neon exit signage, direct to 9/11 emergency buttons in every classroom. The trial. At the preliminary hearing, I testified first, hands shaking too badly to hold the microphone steady, repeating exactly what she'd said about the midterm and our grade. Her defense attorney tried cross-examining me as though the class's old prank somehow justified what happened. Mackenzie's father stood up in the gallery in outrage before the judge silenced him, though several jurors were visibly nodding along with him anyway. Mackenzie testified about the window in a flat, steady voice. "I knew we were dying. I could feel it. My dad taught me the symptoms: headache, nausea, confusion. confusion. We had all of them, so I broke the window. When the defense suggested she could have hurt someone with flying glass, she answered simply, "They would have been dead if I hadn't." The lawyer had nothing left to say. The full trial started 4 months later, packed daily, with overflow rooms running video feed. The twisted, tool-marked gas valve was entered as evidence. Riley Evans explained again, in detail, how the tampering had bypassed the safety mechanism that would have shut the leak off automatically. On the stand, Wellington finally admitted she'd touched the valve 2 nights before. "I smelled something weird," she said, voice barely audible. "I thought if I could fix it myself, it would help my 10-year review." The prosecutor pulled up her financial records on the courtroom screen, months behind on payments, an active eviction, maxed out credit cards. "You were desperate, weren't you? Desperate enough to do anything to keep your job." "I needed this job," she whispered. "It was all I had left." The defense's psychiatrist testified about a dissociative episode, her decision-making capacity supposedly offline during the incident. The prosecutor's response cut through it instantly. "Are you saying she didn't understand locking children in with carbon monoxide was dangerous? Because she clearly understood they'd fail their midterm if they left." Victim impact statements were brutal. Rick's mother, holding a folder of medical bills thick enough to need both hands, said flatly, "He was perfectly healthy before you locked him in that room. Now he might need these shots for the rest of his life." Mike's father, a construction worker built like he could bench press a car, broke down describing his son's panic attack and the bedroom they'd had to move to the first floor so Mike could always see an exit. "She didn't just poison their bodies," he said. "She poisoned their minds." Jenny's mother could barely finish her statement, describing a daughter who sometimes looks at old photos of herself and asks who the girl in the picture is. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty on every single count: reckless endangerment, false imprisonment, read aloud 8 times each. Wellington didn't faint or cry. She just sat there, empty, staring at nothing, as if her mind had already left the room. At sentencing, the judge didn't hold back. "You turned a classroom into a gas chamber and used grades as the lock." 12 years in state prison. The courtroom erupted, some parents cheering, some crying. Wellington had to be helped out by bailiff, her legs no longer cooperating. After, the district quietly settled every lawsuit within 2 months, refusing to disclose numbers, then announced budget cut to music, art, and every sport except football and basketball. Nobody believed the timing was coincidental. 5 months later, we finally sat for the rescheduled biology midterm, silent, methodical, nobody joking or whispering, under a gentle substitute who kept saying, "Just do your best." I didn't care what grade I got. I just wanted it over. A follow-up news segment 6 months out showed how differently each of us was carrying the aftermath. Mike, on 3 medications just to function through daily panic attacks. Jenny, relying entirely on note cards because she no longer trusted her own memory. Her parents had started labeling everything in their house, down to old family photos. Rick, wearing a medical alert bracelet in case of internal bleeding from his permanently damaged platelet. Mackenzie asked what she wanted people to know, said simply, that we almost died because someone thought their job review mattered more than our lives. She went on to early admission at 3 colleges and chose the one with the strongest emergency management program. Her father began visiting schools to teach kids the difference between a real emergency and a drill. If an adult tells you to ignore the alarm, you run anyway. Detention beat dead. On our last day of senior year, our traditional walk through the school went silent as we passed Building C, gutted, under construction, being rebuilt with new ventilation, exits every 30 feet, and windows that opened from the inside. At graduation, the principal called for a moment of silence for the Building C survivors, who showed us that sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to survive. Miss Wellington's name disappeared from the building entirely, plaques removed, her yearbook photos quietly cut out, as if the school were trying to erase she'd ever been there at all. Afterward, the 5 of us, Mike, Jenny, Rick, Mackenzie, and I, met at a coffee shop and mostly talked about college and normal, ordinary things. But there was a quiet understanding underneath it all, something nobody outside that room would ever fully get. Mike mentioned he'd kept the quiz from that day, vomit stain and all. "Proof it really happened," he said. "Sometimes it feels like a nightmare I made up." Jenny, who still doesn't remember any of it firsthand, said quietly, "It wasn't. Before I left for college, I found my old biology notebook while packing, her aggressive red ink corrections, her rigid formatting rules, and walked it straight to the trash without a second thought. Some things you don't need to hold on to." My mom drove past the school on my last day home. New emergency exits framed in red. Alert buttons visible from the street. Signs everywhere. Student safety first. No exceptions. "You okay?" she asked, watching me look at Building C. "Yeah," I told her. And for the first time since that morning, I actually meant it. Years later, people ask sometimes whether I think about that classroom often. The honest answer is that I don't have much choice in the matter. Certain smells still catch me off guard. A whiff of something faintly metallic near a gas stove. The particular staleness of an overheated room. And for half a second I'm back there, watching the blinds close, watching Jenny's paper slide across the desk toward her. Mike and I stayed close through college. He majored in emergency management, department, the same field Mackenzie went into, and the two of them ended up working, briefly, at the same regional office years later, running safety audits for public schools across 3 counties. He told me once that the first thing he checks in every building isn't the fire extinguishers or the exit signage. It's whether the doors lock from the inside, and whether any single person in that building has the unsupervised authority to keep them that way. Jenny never fully got her memories of that day back. What she has instead is a version of the story assembled entirely from other people's accounts. Mine, Mike's, the court transcripts her parents kept in a drawer for years before finally showing her, piece by piece, when she asked. She told me once that it feels strange to grieve something secondhand, to carry the weight of an event she can only access through other people's eyes. But she doesn't avoid it anymore. She reads the transcript sometimes, she said, the way other people might reread an old diary, not to relive it, just to understand the shape of what happened to her. Rick's treatment stretched almost 2 years before his platelet counts finally stabilized enough to stop the daily injections. He still wears the medical alert bracelet, more out of habit now than necessity, he says, though I notice he's never once taken it off in front of me. He went into nursing, oddly enough, he told me, toward exactly the kind of work that had once been done to him with such carelessness. He wanted to be the version of care he never got that morning. Mackenzie's father retired from the fire department a few years back, but never really stopped doing safety talks at local school. I went to one once out of curiosity and watched him tell a gym full of 9th graders the same line he'd told his daughter in that hospital parking lot all those years ago. That detention is always better than dead. And that no teacher, no grade, no midterm worth any percentage of anything is worth staying in a room that's trying to kill you. The kids laughed a little, the way teenagers do when something is too heavy to take in directly. I don't think any of them understood, not really, why his voice cracked lightly every time he said it. As for me, I don't teach. I thought about it for a while, some instinct toward reclaiming the profession from what she'd made of it. Maybe, but in the end, I couldn't picture standing at the front of a classroom without thinking about the version of authority that almost got 8 of us killed. Instead, I ended up in workplace safety compliance, auditing buildings, writing the kind of protocols that exist specifically so that no single person's judgment, panic, or desperation can ever again become the only thing standing between a room full of people and an open door. Miss Wellington is still serving her sentence, as far as any of us know. None of us have looked much further than that. There didn't seem to be anything left to learn from checking. What stays with me isn't really the smoke, or the sirens, or even the padlock. It's the quiz. The fact that in the middle of an active, worsening emergency, with kids collapsing around her, her instinct was to reach for a stack of paper and punish us for being afraid. I think about how much fear must have already been living in her, quietly, for months, for that decision to make sense to her in the moment. It doesn't excuse anything. It just makes the whole thing sadder in a way I wasn't prepared for at 17, and still haven't fully worked out at 24. We broke a window that day because nobody in a position of authority would open a door. I've spent every year since trying to make sure that's never the only option left for anyone else. Like and subscribe for more videos like these. Thanks for watching.